Hey everybody, it's Mike Venus, La Soul, and I'm back. And this is the third video in my producer's tip thing when working with these standalone devices, primarily the Akai Force and the MPC lineup, or the MPC Live 2, 1, etc. Any of the newer ones. And this is a strategy that I find that works best that will help anybody that's just working with it alone. In this, in the first video, I talked about utilizing the sampler and the different sampling features to create your own audio sounds out of your melodies or whatnot, and then putting them in the drum track and utilize that to preserve the CPU. Also, in the second video, I suggested the key group and explain what it is and how to use that. So in this one, this is a different strategy. You can use this in combination of the first two videos, or you can use it if you just want to use the plugins. Now, I know a lot of people, it's very important for them to preserve their MIDI, especially when they're creating projects, because let's say, for an example, you wrote the song in the key of E, and you have all your MIDI, and you done made a WAV file, but the person is like, I have a problem with that. Like, I can't sing in the key of E, or let's move it down to the key of C. Well, if it's in an audio file, the warping is okay, but if you transpose the sound to a different key, either up or down, it's going to change the way it plays. You don't really want that sometimes. So this is where preserving your MIDI comes in play, because you can always shift your MIDI, right? But you can't really do that much with audio. So another thing you can do is utilize the MIDI tracks. Now you got two types of MIDI tracks. You got the MIDI track and you got the CV track. But primarily I'm going to focus on the MIDI track, because the CV track really wouldn't serve any purpose inside the DAW, or not the DAW, inside the Force or the MPC to control those things in that, because it's not CV. Even though it can be used, MIDI is better. Now, in the MPC, you can have up to 128 MIDI tracks. The Force, you can only have 128 tracks, period. It don't matter what's, that's how much a project can hold. So just be aware or conscious of that. So back to the point, right? So let's say you got a key group, or you using a plugin, right? You got your instruments on there and you want to write the MIDI for it, right? So this will kind of help to preserve the writing of the song, but this also give you flexibility to change the sound if the artist or the person you're working with doesn't either can sing or perform in that particular key, or they want to change the sounds. So what you would do, you could pull up a MIDI track, assign the MIDI track, right, to send MIDI to that particular track that has the sound on it. It could be either the key group track or the plug-in track. You don't write your MIDI on those tracks. You just write it on the MIDI track. And in the mixer, in the I/O section, you can send it to whatever track where it says send to. You can send it to trigger the sounds either on the key group or the plug-in track. And it will play the sounds, but it won't be no clips on those tracks, or nothing written on those tracks. It'll only be written on the MIDI tracks. You understand? So in this way, you can still preserve your writing if you're writing out the music. And let's say, like I said, the person wants to change the key or change the sound, you're not limited in what you can do. You can always choose a different plugin, sample that, make that into a key group, or use the MIDI to trigger another plugin, and then basically create your sample that way, bounce it down, and do what I suggested in the first two videos. So that's the way that you can work. Yeah, it's more tracks, but you preserve the skeleton, right, of your track within the MIDI track. You can do it with the drum tracks, and you can do it if you say, well, I want to trigger drum sounds, you could do the same thing. You can have all your drums sounds in a particular drum track, but you didn't trigger it on there. You can send it from a MIDI track to trigger it, and it will trigger it, but it'll be on a MIDI track. So I know that might sound a little complicated, but it's not. It's pretty simple. So yeah. And what this does, MIDI, or the device processing MIDI, is far easier and stressless on these devices than trying to maintain a plug-in track or one of the synth sounds that come inside the MPC or the Force and other stuff. And you can make up as many different MIDI patterns as you want. You might make a bunch of MIDI clips in your MIDI track and then have that as a way to say, hey, okay, you don't like that, what you think about this? It helps you to still be able to be productive, but it also gives you the flexibility to always have that option to be prepared to change it, so that if you're collabing or if the person can't really, they're not feeling that, you can switch it. So utilize your MIDI tracks. Now the CV tracks, I don't own any CV type devices of yet, and I don't think I will. But anybody got more knowledge on that, I will love to learn more about that. But I haven't seen much videos of people talking about using the CB with the MPC as much as I would. But the MIDI tracks, think of your MIDI tracks as where you write out your music. You send that to the different sounds to trigger those sounds so you can have your music play. Okay? And you preserve the writing of your music. You know what I'm saying? It's also good too if you're trying to protect yourself, because let's say you did write a song and you got your melody, you got your chord progression or your harmony, your bass line, your drum pattern and all that written out in the MIDI tracks. You can use that to kind of protect yourself if you have to bring that into a situation that might lead to you suing somebody because they took your music. You have proof. If you bounce everything down to audio stuff and you delete these different tracks that I had mentioned in the first part, you might not be able to prove that, So this is just one way of working with inside the Force or the MPC that I find that is CPU friendly, frees up a lot of space for me to process when I want to add effects and stuff without taxing the machine. Because I know a lot of people got the newer stuff, the newer plugins and stuff like that, and it taxes the CPU. So you got to kind of use that mentality like, hey, let me utilize these sampling capabilities and the MIDI capabilities of this device, which is really where the strength lies inside the Force and inside the MPC line. Okay? So hopefully this was helpful. Let me know. Till the next time, y'all be blessed, be safe, and keep creating. And till the next time I see you, Mike out.